Google is a highly successful online business that's making obscene amounts of money, mainly through its search products that are actually being used by a good part of the world's population. Also interesting to note, they have many other interesting projects, namely around AI and things such as flying cars, that actually got many smart people around the world interested into this company. So in this video, I'm going to talk a bit about the profile of an ideal Google hire and what's it like to be one of the more than 1 million people that want to get a job at Google each year. Now, before going into details and explaining about Google's principles and mission, let me explain you why it's important to study these before applying at pretty much any company. And the first reason is because there is a possibility that you may not be a great fit into that company's culture, which is, by the way, not unheard of, especially since nowadays freelancing becomes more and more of a choice. So, and the other important reason here to read into a company's mission and values before applying is because it will give you lots of interesting insight as to how to prepare from the moment you write your CV to the phone interviews, all the way to the panel interview on site, and even while negotiating an offer with them. So, this being said, Google's mission is actually remained the same since 1998, and that is to organize the world's information and to essentially make it more useful. Now, if you look into Google's largest properties, that is search and YouTube, you'll know that they actually fit quite well into this mission. And by the way, also the other products such as Google's Chrome and even their cloud offerings also fit into this definition of organizing world's information and making it more accessible. So next I'm going to go through what Google calls their 10 things. And they invented this, they wrote this down during the first years of existence. And I'll also give you my 2 cents where I find some relevant information for somebody that's considering to apply for a job at Google. The first and probably also the most important one for Google is to really put the user at the center of everything they do. And I believe that given their monetization strategy here, that is through selling ads, I believe we can also extend this a bit by saying that the user is actually also Google's #1 customer. So we can say here that customer obsession is something is the main highlight here, and it's actually something that characterizes all the best online, including online businesses today. Google's specialty is search. So by specializing them on one thing and doing it really well is what enabled them to become such a successful business. Now, in an HR context, what does it mean for you? It means that if you're really good at one thing, be sure, for instance, AI, be sure that you highlight this wherever you can, including your CV. So for example, if your AI is your thing, make sure that it's right on top of the resume, it's not just the first item of some enumeration. And also, it is you might also consider it as a feasible idea to over-communicate what are your main strengths, because although for you it might sound a bit dumb in the beginning, it's actually a good idea to over-communicate things to emphasize them. So fast is better than slow. It's obviously a very technical reference to what Google is really good about, but with respect to somebody interested in working at Google, I believe the main highlight here is that you should really make sure that to really dive deep into any possible algorithms that they might ask you to develop there, and be sure that you can be sure that optimizations are a very, very sought after quality. Now, whether democracy on the web works or not, I believe that's a debatable topic. Now, what's in for an applicant here, I believe that the main takeaway is to not be afraid to communicate, to take the lead and to have an opinion, because Google actually values a lot people with opinionated people. And if you only Google a few Google HR related events in the recent years, you'll notice that pretty much all of them started using Google's internal communication system. So being a great communicator here is very, very important. Now, probably the main takeaway from this one is to have vision, because really Google predicted much better than other tech giants the mobile first world, and they really capitalized that on this one pretty soon. So having a vision is of course extremely helpful. Alright, so this one is still pretty much up for debate at Google, and especially since they become so good at developing AI. Because in case you don't know, one of the main applications, one of the best applications of AI is within a military context. And actually this is one of the main reasons why CEO Sundar Pichai has also recently launched their principles for developing AI, which is something that of the same structure of these 10 things. Now, with respect to their to getting a job at Google, what's the main takeaway here? Well, it's quite important, because that sense of doing good should serve as a higher purpose, and you should be that type of person that gets motivated by these things and performs considerably better because of this sense of higher purpose. This one is again something extremely technical, and probably the main highlight is the creative nature of the community at Google. Google is an international business, and they have offices around the world, and they are not afraid to emphasize that they are using pretty much any tool at their disposal to deliver on their original mission of organizing the world's information. And probably the main takeaway here would be to have that, again, that sense of a higher purpose, and this should be the strongest motivator for you to do great things. So this one is probably the most interesting when it comes to giving you a glimpse into what Google values the most in employees. And aside from the dress code recommendation, they also go on to describe their employees as passionate people from diverse backgrounds with creative approaches to work, play, and life. So is this you? Does your CV reflect these things? Do you take advantage of any of these keywords? I believe the information presented in this core value is fundamental to understanding and to approaching, especially the behavioral part of Google's interview, which I'll describe later. So this one should probably go without saying, but Google is actually really good at predicting what the user wants, and really about obsessing around that customer. And how they achieved it? Well, they achieved this through continuous iterations and being really, really good at predicting stuff. So of course you have to be exceptionally good at that one thing that your job requires you to do, but Google, as being a large company, they also have to really be careful about who they hire in terms of cultural fit, and they even have a term for this. It's called Googleyness, and what happens here is that they will have to ask you multiple questions and even multiple follow-up questions in order to better assess your personality and assess you as a fit there. And the first part, and one of the most important parts of this, is to test your cognitive abilities. And this essentially, for instance, they will ask you questions such as, tell me about the time that you solve a tough problem. How did you solve it? Walk me through the specific steps, and even dive deeper into details, depending on what your answers are there. Now, how do you prepare for these things? And my proposed approach here is to use a two-step process. The first step would be to think of the main highlight of your career, or if you don't have a career, just think of the main highlight in your life, professionally speaking. and really take the time to write down everything you remember about it. And don't worry if it takes 1 hour. The key here is to be as detailed as possible and to keep it in a narrative structure. Now, once you're done writing down the main story, now try to make a summary of this still in a narrative format, and try to structure it in 4 parts here. For the first part, try to describe the situation that happened. Then second, try to describe the tasks that were required to get done, and these two can actually be combined together in some cases. Then the third one is what are the actions that you took with respect to the before mentioned. And finally, talk about the results that were in that scenario. And by structuring the summary into 4 parts, you do what's called to answer, to narrate a story using the star format. So this is really what the star format is all about. Now, keep in mind some keywords and some ideas that I referenced when I talked in the previous section about Google's 10 things. For example, if you coded some website, be sure to highlight speed. Then if you worked on a team, be sure to highlight that there was communication going on and that you valued differences of opinion. Maybe you were involved in a commercial project before, in which scenario a good pitch would be to highlight your motivation coming from a sense of a higher purpose. Also, if you worked on something, see if any of these keywords are representative. Passionate people from diverse backgrounds with creative approaches to work, play and life. And finally, if you worked on some project from someone else, or if you had a boss, be sure to mention how you went above and beyond to reach your goal, show customer obsession and thirst for excellence. Alright, so I believe these are the main highlights as to what's really important when building your first story. Now, once we have that first story, try to do, let's say, 4 more such stories with another time the main highlights in your career, or pretty much the main highlights in your life if your career is not there yet. And if you're looking for examples of what types of stories, if you're looking for ideas that will help you to bring back some memories here, just take these behavioral questions as examples. So, for example, you could build a story about the time that you had to deal with ambiguity, or talk about the time when you had to deal with a major failure, and so on. So once you're done writing down your main stories, the next part is to actually prepare to answer some of the most common behavioral questions, and you should just pick the 20 most common of them. Here are some examples, and just answer them. And one strategy here is not just to provide one answer, but try to provide 3 answers here, because the idea during the interview is to impress, to make a good impression, and win some buy-in from the main stakeholders of that recruitment process. And by the way, this is advice from Google itself. Also, writing down those answers will help them stick better in your memory. So there you go. This is I believe the main preparation that you should perform with respect to the behavioral part of the interview. And I believe this will also help you throughout the interviewings at Google and pretty much any company in general. And finally, remember, at the beginning of the video I said that there are 2 main things that Google looks for in a recruit, and aside from the technical abilities, right? The first one was the cognitive abilities, and the second is leadership. And the reason why I'm talking about leadership here is because I observed that throughout the years, various HR leaders at Google talking about emergent leadership, and this basically means that you as a leader should show your ability to first step in when there's a need for you to do so, but not only that, but also step out when you're no longer required for something. So it would be great if you could also embed this behavior maybe to one of your prepared stories. Google prides itself with allocating the required resources to go through each and every of the 1 million resume they receive each year. So this being said, it's not a secret that the resume screening step is also the step that weeds out the most applicants. But besides this, if you have a great resume, that's going to be basically your passport throughout the hiring process. So without further ado, here are some of my best tips when it comes to building a great resume. So despite the fact that Google spends the necessary time to go through each and every resume, you can imagine that those people are only human beings, you know, so they cannot spend a lot of time on each resume. And in fact, by some statistics, the average amount of time that the recruiter spends to get an impression about someone's CV is 6 seconds. So I believe an interesting exercise here would be to try to go ahead and read your CV in 6 seconds and tell me, would you recruit yourself based on the first 6 seconds of reading your CV? Now, the structure of your CV should be the following. Start with your education, work experience in reverse chronological order, project work, awards, leadership experience, and extracurriculars. Now, according to Google's own recruiters, one of the biggest mistakes that candidates do is that of poorly stating your accomplishments. For example, don't just say you grew sales by 20%, but tell them you accomplished X as measured by Y while doing Z. So this is a more structured, and it will give them a bit more context into why you and not somebody else. Next, despite the fact that Google doesn't require cover letters, they do allow them. So I believe this is also a great way for some of you to make your case. And here are 2 examples that I found the most interesting. And finally, here are some more nuggets directly from Google's websites with a bit of translation from my end.
Align your skills and experience with the job description. This means to be sure you check for key traits of the ideal candidate and try to emulate them into your CV. My advice would be not to try too hard here because you risk making it sound dumb. Number 2, be specific about projects you've worked on or managed. What was the outcome? How did you measure success? Now on this one I developed in the second section to prepare for the behavioral questions. Number 3, if you've had a leadership role, tell us about it. How big was the team? What was the scope of your work? This is essentially one of the stories you have to think for the behavioral part. Keep in mind the emergent leadership part. Number 4, if you're a recent university graduate or have limited work experience, include school-related projects or coursework that demonstrate relevant skills and knowledge. Number 5, keep it short. If there's additional information like a portfolio we need during the hiring process, your recruiter will work with you to collect it.
And finally, this should really go without saying, and while typos won't disqualify you from the process, they will make an impact if you have them on your resume. So please triple check for typos, and ideally have one of your friends to review it for you. Now, the best way to pass the initial screening stage at Google is by far to get a referral there. This basically means to get somebody that currently works at Google to recommend you. And I even heard that Google has a rule of replying within 48 hours to any such applicants. Now, I understand this might not be for everyone, but this is by far the best way to maximize your chances to get a job at Google. Now, the next obvious option is to apply through their jobs website. And to be fair here, it's an excellent jobs website. It's very concise, and Google's has a very good history of being good at hiring and at recruitment marketing in general. But this being said, applying through a website for a job is still a passive experience. So it's that classic funneling experience. So to me, this shouldn't be your first option when considering to apply there. Also, given that you don't have a preference on the team that you'd like to work on, why not just trying to simply cold call some HR people? There's some hiring managers, some people that can actually make a difference in your case, because to be fair here, you wouldn't be the first one, and actually many successful HR leaders at Google have gotten very good jobs by essentially cold calling higher ups. The hiring process at Google is super well explained on their website, and you should also know that Google pioneered structured hiring, and the reason why this is very important, because by structuring and quantifying each step of the hiring process, not only you arrive to better decisions, but you also ensure a much superior applicant experience, because this is the most effective and one of the only ways I know to ensure that the applicant experience to applying for a job at any company is an enjoyable one. So this aside, I should also tell you that Google actually does quantify, and there are ranking systems that they use to differentiate between candidates, and then during the after the on-site interview, a panel will basically centralize all those rankings and take in consideration other factors in order to decide whether they'll give you an offer. Now, this being said, here is the hiring process according to Google's website. So there you have it. I made this video knowing that Google's hiring process is quite well documented on the internet, but I believe the documentation is primarily on the technical side of the interview, so I tried to focus a lot more on the Googleyness side of things here, and hopefully you found some information useful, and thank you very much for watching.